Hello everybody and welcome to today's art lecture stream. My name is Iothisk and today we're going to be covering clothing and wrinkles. So we're going to be covering a number of ways to kind of think about wrinkles. All of these items over here that you see on the right of the screen, all of these list items here, they're all kind of ways of thinking about wrinkles. So some people like to break wrinkles into different types. I don't. I don't necessarily agree with breaking them down into types because, like, all wrinkles are basically the same. You know, these are lines that appear in clothing whenever clothing is bunched up or overlapping itself in some way. And so in a sense, all clothing and wrinkles are like the same thing, but you can think of them in a lot of different ways. And so like if it helps you to categorize them into types, then go right for it. But yeah, so I'm going to display a number of I'm going to help try and I'm going to try and demonstrate a number of these types of wrinkles and how to make them and the things to consider when clothing a character or when depicting clothing or drapery or any type of like cloth material that's likely to flow and overlap itself in space because that's what creates wrinkles. All right. So let's go ahead. I'm gonna kind of overlay this on everything else. There we go. All right. So, a couple of things to go over before we get to the different clothing types is we need to understand uh, something called kinetic forces. Let me get this back here. So the body undergoes a number of different kinetic forces that are important to keep in mind whenever you're drawing clothing and wrinkles. So I'm gonna list these all out. Take notes if as you wish. Extending, bending, air bending. Flexing, twisting, and rotating. And I'll kind of go over what each of these means. So, extending, whenever you're pushing a body part out and away from you're extending muscles. So, like if you reach your arms out in front of you, or out to the side of you, you're extending muscles. Whereas bending and flexing is bringing them back in. So whenever you're extending, you are pushing you're putting your hand out in front of you, like in a stop signal or to wave hi to somebody. It's extending, and any time that when you're done with your wave or whatever, you're usually flexing. You're bending it back towards your body. I'm making these motions that you can't see, but I'm trying to think this through a little bit better. So like extending, if you're putting your hand up to like wave at someone, you can think of that, putting it out as extending. And then if you're drawing it inwards and the motion is this way, that's a bending or flexing motion. So if you're reaching out, extending, pulling back in, you're bending or flexing. So yeah, so those are two ways to think about it. And twisting and rotating, they're so I'm talking about different two different things here. So when I'm talking when I'm talking twisting, I'm talking about uh, any time that the form that a single member of the body twists. So like say your forearm, for example, excuse me, for example, can twist from showing the back of the hand to the front of the hand. And then the resulting twisting motion that would come from that. Okay, so we've got like a back of the hand here, and then we've got, let me see if I can. So we got like a back of the hand view here and a front of the hand view here. This is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about twisting. And then rotating, you can think of it as like if you're holding your arm outward, like in front of you or something like that. Anytime that it moves this way-ish, or that way-ish, whenever you're moving your arms like up or down, kind of impose these extra images here. This is what I'm talking about. This is the rotating motion. Okay, so we've got a twisting motion, that is the turning, the twisting of a single joint, and then we've got a rotation motion, which is you can think of it as like a these are two kind of distinct things, but they're easy to kind of confuse. So when you're thinking about rotating something, you're rotating an entire limb. When you're twisting something, you can think of it as like flipping your hand back and forth or something like that. Okay, so these are kinetic forces. Um, and again, any time that you're doing any one of these motions, all of these can be linked to. Excuse me, there's a fly in there. All of these can lead to these types of wrinkles. All of these. So it's a good way. Yeah, it's excellent to keep these in mind because whenever something's excuse me, whenever things are making motion. Pardon me a second. The body is a thing that is in motion and it has form, and so it's going to make all of these motions, and all of these motions of the form underneath are going to have an impact on the clothing or whatever that they're wearing. There's a fly in my recording closet. All right. So there we go. Kinetic forces. All right. Important to keep those in mind. And it's a good tool for evaluating, like after the fact, what should a drawing look like? If you're drawing a pose to begin with, and then you start drawing a clothing and you run into a problem, you can ask yourself the question like, well, what exactly are they doing here? And what exactly are the forms underneath their clothing? All right. So first off, I'm going to cover this list of. Well, let me cover it in order anyway. So like passive or I'm going to say inert. So passive or inert wrinkles I kind of think of as like bed sheets. So say you've got a mattress here. It's supported on a bed frame of some sort. you've got a solid form in the mattress, right? And then you have this, you have the elements of a bed sheet or other stuff gripping it as a fitted sheet or a loose sheet. So if I'm thinking of something, but basically the principle behind passive or inert lines is that these aren't really doing anything. They're not responding to any of the kinetic forces. They're just responding to gravity. So this is going to be like kinetic force 0 type of thing. So I'm going to switch the color of my tool here, and say so. If I were viewing this like kind of no, let's not do it that way. So anytime a sheet's laying inert, it might have wrinkles that have it might have these kind of compression wrinkles because bed sheets have been like pushed down or aside, and so they're gonna come up and make kind of like pipe-looking things. So, but they're going to be in line with a number of things. Oh, I didn't cover, but I should cover these type of things. So anytime you have like a hard edge or that something is hanging from or attached to, we can call that an anchor point. And anchor points are basically those areas that are holding the cloth or clothing of some type. So we can consider the corner of this bed is an anchor point. Everything that's leading up to this corner is going to be supported by the mattress, and everything hanging off it is just going to be subject to whatever gravity tells it to do. So if we've got a big sheet hanging off the bed and it impacts the floor or whatever, there are going to be a number of wrinkles that result. Oh, I'm drawing all this in the same. Well, whatever. It happens. So yeah, anytime something's just hanging inert, you need to think about like how it's bunching up on itself, and like this is just clothing folds in general, right? And these are just different ways of thinking about it. Anytime that you've got stuff loose or hanging off, you're gonna have to think about everything that's going on. So yeah, we could think of cloth that way. That's one of the ways we can think of it. One of the ways that you can think of folds anyway. So passive or inert, it's just laying there. It's not doing anything. Sometimes you can just kind of do whatever because they're just laying there. As always, if you're trying to draw something like wrinkled up bed sheets or a pile of clothes, we all have that stuff in our house. So like throw some clothes on the ground and take a picture with your phone. There you go, instant reference to where you got a whole bunch of stuff like that. Okay, so there's passive or inert. So let's see here. All right. So next up, we're going to go with direct thrust. Is that going to show? Oh no, it won't, because it's the wrong type of layer. All right. So direct thrust, anytime something's heading from a point outwards, we've got some motion going on here. So let's say for example, this is kind of a ball form, but we've got multiples to just kind of show, to just try and show motion of the thing. So we got kind of some motion lines going on here to indicate that something is in motion here. And so this isn't going to apply only to solid forms like a ball or something like that. It's going to apply to clothing too, right? So if we're talking about direct thrust, we can talk about, say we've got a figure here. Yeah. Excuse me, let me try this again. So say we've got a figure here, and they are pointing outwards at something or somebody or whatever. Pointing is rude, but you know what? We're going to do it. Pete's sake. Alright. Hey, no worries. Glad people can show up. Glad people can show up at all, really. So, talking about direct thrust, let me go back to like anchor points here. So here, if we've got like a form that's just kind of holding its arm out, right, and say that we want to indicate that it's clothed, there are anchor points where the clothing is going to want to try and hold on to. So the anchor points, you can think of anchor points as existing kind of anywhere on the body, but they're going to be more prominent at joints. So when we're thinking about like a anchor point on a sleeve, it's usually at this sleeve seam right here. And so if we've got a raised, jutting out arm or something like that, where we might have some motion to where it's emanating both outwards towards the hand and inwards towards the seam here. So if we've got like a tight, so here on the underside here, right, because the arm is raised, this area of clothing is going to be tight, and so we're going to have like we can have lines emanating from the armpit area that are straight, that indicate that things are going tight there. And on the upper side, that area is going to be compressed, because when clothes are lying like naturally on a form, there's some slack with the shoulders there. So things are going to be headed outwards from this direction, right? And then the opposite's going to happen on the upper end. We're going to have some stuff moving inwards. So we're going to have the clothing moving inward is going to bunch itself up at a place. Let me kind of zoom in here at the shoulder area. So we've got clothing that's going to bunch up here, and it's going to split out there in because this is basic physics, right? Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. It's if it's going to tighten somewhere, it's going to loosen somewhere else. If it's going to tighten across here, it'll loosen there. Anytime that clothing is loose but compressed is when you're going to find these wrinkles. And say that there's like there's a bit of action out here with the hand as well, right? And so if we've got this kind of twisting action, we can think of drawing a wrinkle across the form at the elbows. So this would be another place where they're likely to be like either just residual wrinkles because the material has been flexed that way so many times. This is a definitely more prominent in like clothing with stiffer materials, and we'll get to materials later. But this happens to pretty much any clothing that is folded repeatedly at a place. You'll get these kind of fatigue wrinkles. But yeah, so we'll get. Actually, that would be opposite, but so let's fix it. Let's fix it. Because if you're thinking of if someone's face is pointing like this way, this general direction, and they're using their finger to point out, they're rotating their arm kind of in this direction. This is way too thick of a thing at this. Their arm is rotating in kind of like this way, and so we've got, this will be the inside of the hands, and then this will be this way, and then we might get some wrinkles coming up the opposite way, because these are going to be coming in down like that, and then there's an opposing anchor point right here. We're going to have, again, the equal and opposite reaction of the clothing. Yeah, this is very imprecise because I'm using the big ol' ink. Here, but you can kind of get the idea. So like there's a motion going on, like say he's like lifting up his hand or something like that. We've got some wrinkles that indicate that, right? So we've got the squished stuff up here, and then the stretched stuff is going to be more along the bottom. So like say that these top ones are going to be like slightly looser, and by looser you can think of them as a kind of fatter clothing wrinkles. They've got bigger. You could think of them as like larger waves. So like a loose wave is going to be big and like that, and where a tight wave is going to be like that, right? So you've got a big loose wave right here, and then we've got an area of tension right here. So we're going to have some tight. And this is another thing to notice, is that clothing wrinkles tend to have some spiral patterns. So they tend to emanate from like a single area in a spiral. Yeah, but again, we'll come back to that later. So yeah, you can think of that as direct thrust. So like it's very different from passive because we're on top of a form that is moving, right? So yeah, here we go. All right, we're gonna move on to bending. Oh, whoops. We're gonna move on to bending. All right. So when we are, so like you can think of like something as shooting out. If something's got a hinge, and multiple parts, it's got this bending action, right? So it can move. So if we're thinking of this as like an arm or something like that, this area right here can move either, continuously that way, or it can swing back up. So let me kind of draw kind of another shadow thing here. We can have this kind of upward action that's based on this hinge right there. So it's got a radial motion, so to speak, right? So like you've got a circle, so like you've got a hinge, you can draw basically a circle area out from it that tells you where the ends of this thing can be. For example, we could have it straight in the middle. Dotted lines to kind of indicate that this is where this could be. All right. So we've imagined this kind of rigid structure. If we put clothing over the top of it, where are the anchor points going to be? We're gonna see stuff. We're gonna see stuff like we're gonna see. So keep in mind, like, the bend itself is going to be an anchor point, right? And then anything that's up top or up a little higher is going to be its own anchor point. So we have to keep in mind both the bending of joints and members, and where things are going to flow down from due to gravity, right? So yeah. So let me take this and kind of make it bigger. Oh, whoops, that's not how I want to do this. Okay. Okay, so let's say that I want to place clothing over this. I've identified my anchor points already, right? Because I've got like the top of a joint, if I'm thinking of it as like a shoulder, and then this more like an elbow maybe. So I've got an upper anchor point right here. This is where the clothing is hanging from. It's not necessarily going to have any like looseness to it, right? Because the clothing is drawn tight over an area, right? And again, on the opposite end of the joint, we're going to have that compression area. So this is where we're going to have some wrinkles, right? And then the bend here is going to be due to like it's tight here due to gravity, right? But the opposite action occurs at this area, right? It's going to be tight across here, and then the wrinkles are going to emanate from here, because we've got the bending action upwards, right? And then like clothing that's fitted properly is going to kind of hang on to the wrist. So it will be drawn up there, and then its high point is going to have stuff that flows out of it, right? So here at the joints, we're going to have stuff. You can think of like you could think of the anchor point as being the inside of the joint. Right there. But wherever things are hanging from or tightened, both of those can be considered anchor points. So for these bend folds here, though, we're focusing on like these areas right here, to where we've got one joint meshing up against another, right? So here we've got a pit of the elbow, here we've got the armpit, and it could even happen if you've got like the wrist bent kind of a funny way. There could be a wrist pit area too, right? Right here potentially. And so if someone's wearing like a glove or something, and their hands are bent out this way, there's going to be, again, one of these bending folds right here. So, and anytime that you're drawing wrinkles, you want to keep the form in mind, right? So, like here, I'm not necessarily, I didn't necessarily emulate like a perfect human form, obviously, but yeah. And so when we don't have a bend, like here specifically at the elbow, if we've got this extended, everything's just going to kind of flow down from this point, right? And there's not necessarily going to be like one of these like tight spirally creases right here. We might see like a couple lines, from the residual bending of clothing or whatever. But yeah. Oops. Hang on a second. Let me turn my phone off because it is being a right noisy prick right now. All right, so yeah, bend, bend wrinkles. All right. Next up is going to be crossing wrinkles. So, all right, crossing wrinkles. I'm gonna pull these kind of up at the same time because they have a lot of similarities. Crossing wrinkles and compression wrinkles, right? Um, so crossing wrinkles, we can think that anytime a figure is um, crossing wrinkles refer to any time a wrinkle takes kind of a zigzaggy pattern, like this and like that. So we've got bends inward and outward, and outward and inward. This is going to be like, we could imagine it kind of like a tube, right? Folding over on itself in a zigzag pattern. You know, but this happens naturally in clothing. So, this is kind of bringing another element in, like, perhaps before we're, like, totally ready. But say we've got something, say we've got a piece of clothing that's hanging from two anchor points right here. And there's a bit of slack in the middle here, so there's this loose area that can be carried down by gravity. Crossing folds can be thought of as any time that there's going to be a zigzag pattern there. And it can also happen on a it can also happen on an arm, say it's a sleeve or something like that. One of the great examples in when Bern Hogarth covers this is he brings up an example of some like very loose fitting gloves, and so these gloves are going to have a kind of a compressed nature to them, but they can also have this crisscrossing pattern, right? And then sometimes the wrinkles will like meet together, and sometimes they won't. Sometimes they'll continue in this crisscrossing pattern. This is an example. Someone wearing a very loose kind of glove or something like that, to where it's just kind of fallen down on itself. And you can think of it as like it's squishing in on itself in a compression, and that would be the difference between just a crossing, a simple crisscrossing one, and then a compression one is like there are corrugations happening, right? The wave is being tightened because you compressed it from this side and that side. Or in this example, you could say like gravity is wanting to carry the glove down here, but the form of the hand is acting as an anchor point. And again, physics, equal and opposite push-pull reaction. So yeah. So anytime it's you can have wrinkles that cross in front of each other like that. All right. So yeah, those are crossing and compressing. Next one is interesting, fragmentation. So fragmentation wrinkles are wrinkles that aren't related to any particular like thrusting direction or anchor point. So if you've got just say like a dry, old wrinkled cloth or something like that. Um, if you're hanging something, so like if you've ever taken like a I don't know if this shows my age, but if you've ever taken like a an old washcloth, that was like wet and like dried and like kind of froze in that shape or whatever, that can result in these kind of like fragmentation wrinkles where things don't necessarily like have a pattern or make a whole lot of sense, right? It's just a regular worn piece of clothing, and there's no necessarily like big uh, there's no sense to where the uh, there's no establishing hanging point or anchor point. There's no center to the spiral, so to speak. It's just kind of all out there. And probably like the best way to replicate folds like these is to study something that's really wrinkly, like what would be really wrinkly? Again, something that a dish towel or rag or something that got misplaced and dried on the floor and then stretched out again is going to have all of these craggly looking features to it that don't have a whole lot of like that don't make a whole lot of sense. Um, the materials become like kind of rigid and it can start taking on these kind of like shapy looking things. Or just have these like rando lines that don't necessarily make any particular sense because the thing was crumpled up and set aside or something like that. So fragmentation can be it can be kind of fun. So to just kind of like work it out, figure it out. But yeah, definitely grab a reference for things that you find difficult. So yeah, fragmentation wrinkles, they don't necessarily make any sense. Um, they're indecisive. They're not directly linked to an anchor point. So yeah. All right. And so I had an example of this earlier. Whoops. I had an example of this earlier, where I did the crisscrossing fragmentation thing. But you can also call this a swag or a hanging wrinkle when you've got two or more points and a cloth is draped over them, but it has some slack. So gravity can kind of carry it down. So if we're thinking like a proper drapery or something like that, you have these points that are holding up the fabric, and then the wrinkles emanate out from those points. And like if you've got a figure, for example, you can draw this on a figure as well. If a figure is kind of hunched forward and wearing like loose clothing or something like that, so say that this is kind of a bulky figure, but whatever. So say like they're leaning forward, right? This is like their neck area, but they're wearing kind of loose clothing. Their shoulders are going to act as these anchor points, or everything that is along the top is going to act as something of an anchor point. And so the shirt can hang kind of down and forward. And there's going to be these draping kind of folds, right? Because gravity is pulling down these things, but the cloth is being held up there. So you can think of the pattern of the wrinkles as emanating from those anchor points. Are they're not being affected by the the gravity, but they have a gravity of their own. So like all of the wrinkles will kind of point to your anchor points. But so like keep those in mind. You've got your anchor points. You've got gravity that is going to work on any garment that is producing slack. So if I added arms or something right there, there's going to continue to be like clothing wrinkles at the joints. So if I sound like I'm repeating myself, it's again because of what I said earlier, that these are not necessarily categories of wrinkles, right? Because all wrinkles are pretty much the same. These are just different ways of thinking about it. So yeah, really loose clothing can be held off of here, or if it's super drapey, like someone's wearing like wizard robes or something like that. Yeah. Just kind of do whatever. Clothe your furries however you want. But yeah, so those are kind of swagger hanging whenever you've got two anchor points, and they're not necessarily in competition. This is going to be a difference between when I go to uh, the next thing here. So the next thing here, we're going to think of trap or closure wrinkles. And so this is any time where you have like multiple competing anchor points, where any of them are dominant, and you're going to have to think. Um, so say this is the example given in the book. I'll go ahead and go with that one. The example gone ahead and given in the book is like a raised leg. So say this is like a ankle joint or something like that, and say it's something like that's clinging to the body. So like it's a sweat pant or something like that. We've got a leg form, right? That's being stretched upwards, but we've got multiple anchor points, and things can be kind of competing, right? So we've got again, the top of the joint is typically going to be taut. It's going to be tight, so it's going to be stretched out across here and there, and then the opposite's going to happen here. So there's going to be kind of a bend wrinkle right there, and the bend wrinkles can kind of emanate outwards, right? And kind of confuse. So like the clothing wants to hang from the elastic right here, right? But the bends from the knee or whatever blocks that wrinkle. Whenever one wrinkle is disappearing into another wrinkle, that's what I'm talking about with these trap and closure wrinkles. So we've got something that's emanating like across. Whoops. Switch colors. It's going entirely across it, but we've got stuff hanging down from here for whatever reason. And you can use these like trap and closure wrinkles as like clothing design elements too. So like say again we're designing a figure wearing clothes or something, and we have this kind of like draping toga thing off one shoulder maybe, and then on the other we've got it going out here. So this is what I'm talking about with closure wrinkles. So like if it's coming, say that this garment is coming like underneath the arm, so things are, the convergence point will be a little bit tighter with these, you know, convergence, divergence as they go out, as they come in. If it's wrapped tightly under the armpit and then comes back out over the shoulder right here, this can be a single piece of clothing that has kind of these interlocking wrinkles. So yeah. And we can also get like there are elements of different things in here, right? So I've got some crossing stuff. It's got hanging from the shoulder, but it's also got hanging down, you know? But yeah. Alright, cool. Alright, and then the last one that I can, the last kind of way of thinking about wrinkles is that they're not is that they might be attached to one thing. They might have a single anchor point, and they're just kind of flowing out from it. So I like to think of these flying wrinkles as like flag wrinkles. So if we've got a flagpole right here, and we've just kind of got a banner hanging up, right? It's gonna kind of like billow in the waves here. So like it's gonna be responsive to whatever material is passing over it, right? So it's gonna be kind of flying, floating in the wind. The edges are not gonna be straight like that. They're gonna have kind of a flowiness to them as well. A flag might have corners, but it's not necessarily all the time you can see those corners. But yeah, it's got these like points where it's attached, you're going to see the corners. But everything that's flowing out from that is going to be affected by wind, speed, and direction, and all sorts of stuff. So yeah. Or if we've got the cape of a superhero, it's going to be kind of tight across the shoulders, so there might be some like wrinkles heading out and downwards from those. But the bottom of the cape might be all like billowy. It might take on this this kind of S-shaped pattern, this or this wavy pattern. Or like heck, if I wanted to go like super wavy, it's gonna go like up and down and have crests and stuff like that. And then we can draw up from there, right? And if it comes out from the bottom, there's going to be lines indicating that. All kind of cool stuff. So there we go, an example of kind of flying wrinkles. So like it's not the we'll have like a couple of anchor points, but the rest of the stuff is just kind of billowing in the wind or flowing through the water or whatever. It's clothing as an indication, wrinkles as an indication of flowing air or water. So yeah. All right, cool. So that covers that part. The next part that I'm gonna, no worries. To interrupt, how do you compare or differentiate when an object is flying or laying down? Still learning anatomy. Well, I do have tips and videos related to anatomy, and those will be better suited for like another video. I can go into greater depth on topics like that at another time. Um, but uh, it's things are what you make them, right? So I think you came in just a little bit late. So one of the first things that I talked about were passive and inert things, right? So say that this was the corner of a bed, you know. So differentiating between when something's like flying through the air and active and not is going to be that's going to be based off of like the context clues of what exactly you're drawing. A superhero cape is going to act differently from a bed sheet, right? That's just laying on top of a bed. If you've got Superman wearing a cape up here uh, in this drawing right here, and I better be careful here because, yeah. So we've got an attachment, and things are kind of flowing outwards. So there's kind of this, there's a looseness down here, right? But a tightness up here. So we've got this kind of flow down and outwards, or we've got a kind of up and down action here. So yeah, when things are flying through the air, they'll kind of have this tendency to again their anchor points are going to all point back to a single spot, right? But they'll flow outwards. So yeah, I hope that answers the question at least a little bit. But yeah. No, it's good. It's good to ask questions, for sure. So now the next thing I'm going to be going over. Let's see here. This is going to be kind of the final thing that I'm going over, so because we're wrapping up here. But we're going to go over wrinkle patterns. Textures. Materials. I talked about this just a little bit. I've talked about this just a little bit earlier in our presentation here. But yeah, so to when it comes down to it, a lot of wrinkle patterns have this kind of spiral shape, right? And Hogarth in his book Dynamic Wrinkles and Drapery says like, I'm guessing this is just a way that the universe expresses itself, right? Whenever you're dispersing energy, it's going to go. If something's in movement, galaxies take the shape of these spirals, and your wrinkles are going to take the shape of these spiral things too. So like whenever there's a dispersion of kinetic energy, right? There's that thing that we talked about near the beginning, the kinetic forces. You can review the video if you missed that earlier. But yeah. So there's like a central spot where things are drawn to. So yeah, it's weird that I talk about like anchor points as having like a gravity of their own, and then clothes hanging loose in reaction to gravity. So like it's like the wrinkle lines travel to fall straight to this point, out of the gravity of their own. But like the gravity of clothing is gonna make stuff hang like loose. From anchor points. But yeah, So whenever you're the spiral is a predominant wrinkle pattern. Whenever you're bending something, the lines are going to emanate from that anchor point or gravitate to that anchor point. So keep in mind the spiral. There's the S shape or S curve. Things are just kind of gonna flow out from time to time. If they're hung out from here, we might get some S shape or some S curve. That's hanging out from here, and then this is just something is holding up this form right here and about here, but it's all going to be very flowy, right? So like it's not necessarily either or, spiral or S shape. I can have something like this here, and then I've got a spiral S shape. Whoa, mind blown? No. Mind blown. Yeah. So we've got spiral, S shapes, and then this is going to be combining some thoughts here. The more rigid your your clothing material is, the more harsh its wrinkles are going to be. So, like if I'm taking one of the sides of a pair of jeans or something like that. So, say I'm drawing like a leg out here. Right? If I've got tougher material, like a hard denim or something like that, its angles are going to be it's denim's not a flowy material, right? It's gonna be a bit more rigid. So there are going to be wrinkles there from the consistent kind of fatigue wrinkles that appear at the back of the leg. And if it's going up, it's going to have these kind of going up over the leg. It can have kind of like these sharper, more angular points to where it holds towards the body. And so these sharp kind of like angular wrinkles can be the order of the day for a stiffer material, right? Because there's a difference between silk pajamas and a pair of jeans, right? And there's going to be like the difference even further between the jeans and like the leather of a boot or something, right? So like boot leather can be like super angular. If it's just can be similarly angular, right? Because it's leather is not it can be a very forgiving material, but if you're making it out of if you're making shoes out of it or whatever, you want them like the leather to be like nice and hard. And so anytime that material bends, it's going to take on some kind of harsh, angular looking stuff, and there's going to be fatigue curves in boots at the ankle and at the toes. So yeah, just a whole bunch of things to keep in mind like that. All right, I think I've been going on for about an hour now. Are there any more questions? Yeah, I hope so. And again, this there might be stuff that I've covered earlier, so definitely revisit my video. I will post it in the stream chat here, in the R for Art School Discord, Stream Chat 1 channel. But yeah, and these are all posted to my YouTube channel as well. So yeah. All right, I'm gonna say I'm gonna wrap up the recording now, but I will continue to take questions in the stream chat. So goodbye to our YouTube viewers. Like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Do the YouTube things for me if you like what you see here. And have a good day. So, recording over.